Revealed. The incredible last wish of a death row inmate to see his dog. What happened is touching. Jack sat on the edge of his narrow cot, fingers tracing the faded contours of his prison uniform. The walls of his cell loomed like a prison within a prison, thickened by the weight of finality. Outside, the world continued to move, unaware of the quiet storm brewing inside his mind. The clock ticked relentlessly, each second a reminder of his impending fate. Death row. 2 days left. Just a small window of time to grasp a sliver of hope. That glimmer came in the form of Max, his dog, the only creature in the world who knew the truth of his heart. Memories swirled in his head, vivid snapshots of a time before the bars and chains. Jack could still hear the laugh of his younger self, that playful boy who ran through fields with Max by his side, a tangled mass of energy and joy. But trouble followed him like a shadow. The adults always spoke of potential but never noticed the kindness tucked beneath the bravado. They cast him aside as a mere troublemaker, never realizing that deep down, all he wanted was to be loved, to be understood. The thought tightened around his chest, a ball of anger and loss spiraling into depths he feared to confront. The whispers of the guard slithered through the bars, tinged with disdain. "He's a monster," they'd say. Jack felt those words bleed into him, embedding themselves in his psyche. Did they even consider where he had come from? The circumstances that bound him to choices made in desperation? Jack's fingers twitched. He was alone in a sea of judgment, yet amid that darkness, a light flickered. His paintings. They filled the bare walls of his cell, images of soaring eagles and endless skies, stark contrasts to the steel confinement surrounding him. Each brushstroke was a desperate scream for freedom, a plea for understanding. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell, and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As murmurs of his request to see Max reached the outside world, the weight of expectation crashed over him like a tidal wave. Would they allow it? Would they snuff out the flickering light of hope that had found its way into his suffocating existence? The thought gnawed at him, stitching together a quilt of despair and anticipation. Jack needed that reunion. A final gesture, a release of all his unspoken apologies wrapped in a wagging tail and warm nuzzle. Familiarity surged forth, yet doubt threatened to pull him under. An art professor, once indifferent, now saw something in his work, his plight. She became his lifeline, coaxing him to uncover layers of his spirit through paint. Yet, with each stroke, each exploration of vulnerability, the question remained. Would it matter? The clock was still ticking, and as the day grew nearer, the shadow of finality loomed larger. Jack's heart raced with conflicting emotions, dread for the walls closing in, and a yearning for the day his world shifted. The moment drew closer, yet within the confines of his reality, silence weighed heavily. Jack's breath caught in his throat as chaos loomed beyond the gates. Would this dwindling chance for closure slip through his fingers like sand? Just a whisper of uncertainty hinted that escape and connection might not be as simple as he envisioned. He braced himself for the toll that awaited him, heart thrumming as he prepared to confront both his past and the unforgiving present. Would he finally find peace or only more chains? The hours slipped by with agonizing slowness, each tick of the clock echoing like a death knell in Jack's mind. Every creak of the iron bars was a reminder of his confinement, but they were also a loud testament to his resolve. He needed to express himself, needed to harness the emotions roiling inside him before time ran out completely. The paintbrush felt heavier than ever, as if it were dipped in lead instead of paint. Still, he forced himself to move, to breathe life into one last canvas. This painting would be different. It wouldn't just be a reflection of his sorrow or hope. It would be a message. He thought of the sun setting over the fields, a moment so precious, so fleeting, that it evoked the yearning he felt for a life that wasn't defined by the prison walls. Colors danced on the canvas as he poured everything into it. The golden yellow of the sun, the deep blue of the sky, the rich green of life untamed. It was his story, pleading for release. As he worked, fragments of memories surfaced, jarring his concentration. Faces flashed before his eyes, his mother's smile, the disappointment in his father's gaze, the laughter shared with friends who walked away when he stumbled into darkness. Each recollection was a weight pressing down on him, yet each stroke also carved a path towards forgiveness. He was shedding a skin that had cocooned him in despair and self-loathing, paving the way for his truth to emerge. Jack had often fought against the labels affixed to him: misfit, convict, killer. But as he connected with the colors on the canvas, he began confronting a different question. Who had he been beyond those titles? Each sweep of the brush began to articulate feelings of remorse and a longing for connection. The world outside his cell, a world that continued to thrive, felt simultaneously unattainable and achingly near. He wasn't merely painting to distract himself. He was manifesting a desire to be seen, understood, to articulate the subtle vibrations of his truth. With Max's arrival still uncertain, Jack couldn't afford to waver. A nagging fear threatened to engulf his momentum. What if he never saw his dog again? What if his final moments were spent in isolation, swallowed by the very silence he sought to escape? The thought sent chills down his spine, but it also ignited a fierce determination. This painting, this representation of who he was, could bridge the chasm between hopelessness and redemption. With the image of Max, tail wagging, bright eyes filled with love, guiding his thoughts, Jack allowed himself to paint a future that reflected not just his pain, but the love he held. Days of regret had to lead to something more than surrender. Perhaps they could galvanize him into a final act of defiance against the very system that sought to define him. Exhausted but invigorated, he stepped back to survey his work. The canvas resonated with energy, a testament not only to his struggle but also to his resilience. But in that moment of triumph, a heavy knock echoed through the corridor, jolting him back to the grim reality surrounding him. The guard's voice rang out, simple yet foreboding. "It's time." Jack's heart dropped. There was no way to escape what came next, and yet within him ignited both fear and an insistent flicker of hope. He had put every part of himself into that painting, crafted not just for himself, but for Max, for the world that might judge him still. Would he be able to face his fate? Could he transform dread into courage? And would this last wish manifest in a way he never expected? He clenched his fists, stepping toward the door with a sense of determination he hadn't known until that very moment. Whatever lay ahead, Jack was ready, not just to confront the final countdown, but to embrace the chance for connection, even in the face of death. The doors creaked open, and Jack took a deep breath, ready to step into what might be his final chapter. As he crossed the threshold, he couldn't shake the lingering question. Would redemption be found in a wagging tail? Or were the bars of his confinement about to tighten around him once more? The moment Jack stepped through the heavy door, the blinding fluorescent lights of the corridor pierced through the shadows that had enveloped him for so long. Each bulb felt like a spotlight, illuminating the stark transition from the solitary world of his cell to an existence filled with inadvertently judgmental gazes. He sought to steady his breath, but the rapid thump of his heart echoed louder than any guard's orders. Would he be able to hold on to the emotions he had so powerfully expressed on canvas? The metallic clang of the door closing behind him separated Jack from his prison-made refuge. The space felt narrower and more suffocating now. As he moved forward, he felt every step weighted with an urgency, a compulsion that urged him to make the most of whatever time remained. Razors of doubt sliced through him. Was painting truly enough? Would a mere canvas communicate his struggles? Or had he just indulged in a naive hope? The guards remained stoic, their faces blank masks, as if their humanity had been stripped away along with his freedom. One guard led the way, the others flanking him like sentinels. He noticed their indifference, the chill of their professionalism, that contrasted sharply with the intimate warmth he had forged with his painting. Did they even see him, this reformed man? or were they merely peering through the lens of his past transgressions? As they arrived at the processing area, a space where men like him were prepared for their next phase, Jack's thoughts flickered to Max. He had held on to the image of the dog, the connection they shared, but now the prospect of telling that story felt more daunting than ever. How could he explain this bond to those who had never experienced such loyalty? Could he find a way to capture his heart through words, or would he resort to silence again, just like he had for so many years? "Your last visit is about to happen," the guard said, his tone devoid of empathy, as he uncuffed Jack. It left him standing vulnerable, an unsettling mix of dread and excitement coursing through him. He glanced around the grim, sterile space, desperate for some sense of comfort or familiarity, yet all he found was cold tiles and harsh lighting. Heart pounding, Jack took a breath, a mental invocation of the emotions that had crested and now ebbed within him like waves. He could not forget the patterns he had just painted. They had more meaning than the prison outside. He had been shedding layers, confronting the pain of his past and, in the process, reaching toward some semblance of hope. Now, it was time to test the strength that had emerged from those layers. Suddenly, the door at the end of the room opened, and there stood Max, his faithful companion, exuberant and bright-eyed despite the heavy burden that surrounded them both. The dog's tail wagged furiously, embodying all that was pure and untainted. Jack could think of nothing better than to embrace that moment, to connect on a level where words were unnecessary. But as Jack approached, he felt a barrier in his chest, the desperate weight of emotion, of unworthiness. Would Max see him as he had become, or would he merely reflect the shadows of his past? In that moment, a startling realization washed over him. Redemption was not only in what had transpired, it was also in the choices he made moving forward. He remembered his artistry, the power of the colors he had infused onto the canvas, and he embraced the knowledge that the perceptions of others did not define his own worth. The air became thick with anticipation. He knelt, arms open, calling out to Max, but a part of him remained caught in apprehension. The strife had shaped him, but had he emerged transformed? As the dog bounded into his embrace, Jack felt tears slip down his cheeks, mingling with the joy and despair that defined his existence. Would he be able to articulate this moment, to own this connection, or would it slip away just like the flickering brushstrokes fading into memory? With his heart finally open, the boundaries began to blur, and Jack took a deep breath, aware that this was only the beginning of a reckoning that could either lead to liberation or deeper despair. How far would he stretch this newfound strength before the clock ticked its final countdown? The timers loomed, his last wish fulfilled, but unanswered questions still lingered. In the face of what lay ahead, would he find a way to share his truth, or would it remain forever locked within the confines of his soul? The warmth of Max's body against him felt like the first sip of water after a long drought, but it also sent shards of trepidation through Jack's core. As he held the dog tightly, the emotions that radiated from Max reignited a flame of vulnerability he had thought extinguished. Dust motes danced in the harsh light, creating a surreal backdrop to this moment that felt both joyfully intoxicating and suffocatingly real. Jack released a shaky breath, desiring to share all that lay heavy in his heart. Their bond was deeper than friendship. It was salvation itself. But could he adequately express this? Every thought was a tangled vine, wrapping around each part of his psyche. His artistic voice, once so vibrant, now trembled at the edges. He pulled back slightly, searching Max's intelligent eyes, a reflection of the loyalty that knew no bounds. "You've been my light, buddy," Jack finally managed, his voice a whisper of sincerity, yet laced with an underlying fear that this moment wouldn't suffice. What if these words failed him? What if he could never convey the impact Max had on his life? A guard shifted uncomfortably nearby, a reminder that this warmth was framed by cold walls and a ticking clock. Jack felt his heart race. He needed to anchor this moment, to make it permanent. Did his finalized works, those vivid expressions of his inner turbulence, capture this? Did they capture Max? An inexplicable urge welled up within him, and in that fleeting instant, the idea of a future emerged. A future where he could paint and share his journey. A vulnerability surged through him, whispering promises of worth. He could transform this encounter, encapsulate it, making it a vivid part of his storytelling. Suddenly, verbalizing his connection with Max felt essential. "I have to tell them about us, about everything you've done for me," Jack said, his hands trembling on Max's fur. Would he have the resolve to confront the scrutiny of a world that had often dismissed him? The prospect was daunting yet thrilling. The clock's relentless ticking reminded him how precious time was. In their embrace, Jack glimpsed the possibility of healing, not just for himself, but for others who might resonate with his story. He remembered the rough stippling of colors, how each brushstroke had echoed with his cries and triumphs. Those murals became his voice, leaving shadows of himself for others to witness. Would words do justice as well? The idea of sharing his truth ignited a flicker of determination in Jack's chest. Painting was his comfort, but now he would need language as well, a tool he had avoided for so long. He had been hesitant, afraid that the weight of his past would silence him, but that very past had an undeniable strength woven within it, a resilience he felt surging up alongside his loyalty to Max. What if I could paint again? Maybe use these stories, this connection to reach others, Jack pondered out loud, realizing the power with which he could communicate. Whether through canvas or spoken word, there were truths to own. But to step into that light required a terrifying honesty, a confrontation with his demons. Fear wrapped around his consciousness, reminding him of the rejection he had faced, of the judgment that awaited him. Would they accept him? The man he was trying to become rather than the ghost of who he once was. Max nudged his hand, a tactile anchor amid the swell of his thoughts. Jack buried his fingers in the dog's fur, grounding himself in the present. "I have to believe in this," he whispered. Each heartbeat echoed the weight of his resolve. There was no denying the battle ahead, but for the first time he could feel the momentum building within him. Would he possess the courage to confront his past publicly? The reckoning was approaching, and though fear threaded through him, he saw flickers of light emerging, illuminating paths ahead. As the minutes ticked away, Jack's pulse quickened with an unfamiliar urgency. Would he be ready to embrace this? What more could he reveal when surrounded by the judgments he'd fled from for years? The answers lay just ahead, intertwining with the fierce loyalty of Max and the world waiting outside. "Today is just the beginning," he murmured, knowing that his fate was not yet sealed. With a newfound determination anchoring him, Jack faced the remaining hours, poised on the precipice of revelation, ready to seize the opportunity to transform pain into possibility. Would he take the leap into vulnerability, risking it all to share his story? The opportunity beckoned, and the question loomed. Could he truly show the world the colors of his journey? The echo of Jack's last words resonated in the hushed room, pushing against the stale air thick with uncertainty. He sensed Max's heartbeat harmonizing with his own, a rhythm of hope, yet wrapped in the anxiety of unspoken challenges. Jack's gaze shifted to the door, the boundary between him and a world that felt both suffocating and exhilarating. With a determined exhale, he straightened his back, feeling a surge of energy flow through him. A demand to act, to push past the layers of fear stifling his voice. "It's time," he whispered, more to himself than to Max. To step forward meant confronting the very demons he had skirted around for so long. Self-doubt, shame, and the crumbling walls of his past. Jack's mind raced back to the countless hours spent in front of the canvas, each brushstroke a cathartic release. Where had that enthusiasm gone? It had dulled under the weight of silence and the fear of exposure. He clenched his fists, causing Max to look up with concern. "I'll do it," Jack vowed, the words solidifying into a promise against the backdrop of his heart's thrumming pulse. He needed to find a forum to share his story. Perhaps there would be an opportunity for a panel discussion, an art exhibit that encouraged the sharing of narratives, decidedly subjective and raw. Each thought ignited his imagination. Memories collided with future possibilities, leaving a kaleidoscope of potential unfurling in his mind. "All right, Jack, let's figure this out," he spoke aloud, as if confronting a crowd of naysayers who would undoubtedly question his every motive. Researching local art spaces, he envisioned creating a gallery that would juxtapose his visually emotive art with the underlying stories of the people who inspired them, the connections that spoke volumes, including his own bond with Max. As a part of his planning process, Jack began jotting down notes. Words poured out, fragments of stories, emotions, and reflections. He allowed himself to be unfiltered for the first time in a long stretch of days, and he could feel the old familiar energy returning. It felt intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Mornings at the facility started to feel different. Routine interactions with the guards shifted from fear and trepidation to casual nods and small exchanges. Jack was becoming visible, almost emerging like a flower through concrete, inhaling the rich potential of understanding. Each brush of warmth, each gaze of acceptance was a signal to keep pushing, to keep striving. The idea of confronting his past publicly remained daunting, yet empowering. The words, sitting there on the tips of his fingers, begged to be spoken. This was not just for him. Jack envisioned others connecting with pieces of his truth, fragments that mirrored their stories of struggle and survival. If his vision of an exhibit materialized, perhaps it could be a refuge for those who felt isolated in their narratives, a space where pain was acknowledged and transformed. Max's gentle nudge broke Jack's reverie, bringing him back from his spiraling thoughts. Each brown eye gleamed with an understanding deeper than words, and Jack could feel the warm pulse of resolve return to his center. "Together we'll show them," he reassured the dog, planting a hand firmly on his back, grounding them both in the moment. Their journey was continuing to weave together, hand in paw like the brush on canvas, each stroke of courage leading to another blank space waiting to be filled with truth. In the deepest core of his being, a voice emerged, questioning the what-ifs that had plagued him. What if nobody cared? What if they laughed, scorned, or dismissed him altogether? But beneath those doubts, a louder truth began resonating. What if someone else saw their own pain reflected in his story? With that, an idea clicked into place. He would start sharing snippets of his journey online in the coming weeks, making his voice heard before he unveiled the complete portrait. He needed this platform to practice, to hone both his artistic and linguistic skills. Celestial light streamed through the small window, mixing with the shadows in the room, illuminating a path forward. And as Jack prepared to carve out a light within the darkness, he felt the stirring of something greater, a shadow of anticipation. But just before he could take that leap, his thoughts shifted back, replaying the jagged edges of doubt. Would vulnerability become his strength, or would the whispers of his past push him back into despair? The answers hovered tantalizingly at the edges of his awareness, waiting to be uncovered. Would he embrace the challenge of revealing his authentic self, even as the shadows lurked behind him? With that question burning in his mind, Jack knew the next phase of his journey was about to begin. The early mornings seeped into Jack's routine like a gradual tide, washing away remnants of uncertainty and self-doubt. As light poured through the barred window, he could feel its warmth challenging the chill of his fears. Each day, he sat at the small desk, a sanctuary of sorts where sketches danced across the page as his thoughts flowed like the colors of his palette. He had committed to engaging online, distributing snippets of his journey, small fragments of the man he used to be, intertwined with the man he aimed to become. After weeks of planning, his first post finally took shape. It was raw and unguarded, a confession about the struggles of living amidst the shadows of despair. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the upload button, pulse racing. The act felt monumental, thrusting him into vulnerability he had long avoided. "Maybe this is where I start to conquer my demons," Jack muttered, swallowing a lump of trepidation lodged in his throat. When he clicked upload, it felt like tearing away the old skin he'd wrapped himself in, freeing, yet terrifying. Within moments, notifications buzzed around him, sparking a flicker of excitement. Each comment was a brushstroke on this evolving canvas of self-expression, bringing nuance to the narrative he was weaving. Positive feedback poured in, as did stories from others who resonated with his experiences. He savored this collective catharsis, connecting with voices that echoed his own. But every confrontation with openness summoned the specter of critique. What if he invited judgment or ridicule? Jack pondered each reaction with a mixture of hope and anxiety, yet beneath it all was a growing resolve. Weeks rolled on, the momentum propelling him into a rhythm of creativity and introspection. His sketchbook burgeoned with drawings depicting moments of his life, fleeting joys, haunting regrets. The pieces encapsulated fragmented pieces of his existence, and he began to see patterns. The interplay of light and dark in his work mirrored his internal landscape. Max watched these transformative stages with devoted eyes, always close by, grounding him in the reality of connection. As Jack painted, he felt the push and pull of presence and absence, the binding theme of his experiences coalescing into something tangible, something necessary. It became critical for him to articulate these feelings in the narrative he was crafting. Would he be able to find the right words, the right images to bridge the chasm between his past and the future he sought? He decided to announce the idea of the exhibit, the culmination of a journey from isolation to connection. With Max nestled at his feet, a photograph was taken to accompany the next post. Jack, resolute and wide-eyed, paintbrush poised in midair, surrounded by rough sketches of the gallery layout. Art as a voice, art as a refuge, he typed slowly, allowing the truth of those words to settle in his heart. The draft felt potent, charged with the gravity of intention. Would others understand the significance of what he envisioned? As the post button loomed overhead once more, Jack felt a thrill course through him. Was he ready to surrender his heart to the world again? Steeling himself against the reality of rejection, he proceeded to enact another leap of faith. After posting, a crushing sense of vulnerability washed over him like a cold wave. There were the voices of previous experiences, the mockery, the doubting glances, the wounds from not fitting in. Those thoughts threatened to swallow him whole, invoking the shadows he had fought against for so long. But when he glimpsed at Max, with his unwavering loyalty, something inside him shifted again. The bond between them was unshakable, a testament to resilience. They had journeyed through depths together, and he couldn't let doubt steer him now. Glimmers of excitement returned as comments flooded in, others wanting to explore the exhibit, keen to share their stories. Jack stared at the screen, disbelief morphing into anticipation. Yet amid this sunrise of encouragement, a creeping sense of fear clouded his vision. What if the reality of the exhibit did not live up to the ideals he had painted in his mind? And as those thoughts spiraled, a familiar figure approached him in his mind, one that reminded him of the fears he had not yet faced. Jack's heart raced. He had to confront these fears not just to expose himself, but to finally embrace the man he was becoming. The time had come to face not just the world, but the reflection of himself within it. How would he navigate this uncharted territory of self-acceptance through the lens of his art? A gnawing question loomed, one that filled him with both excitement and trepidation. What awaited him on the other side of revelation? Would he soar amidst acceptance, or would he crash beneath the weight of his past? Every brushstroke felt like a potential misstep now, an echo of his internal dialogue reverberating through the space he occupied. Days turned into nights, and Jack's heart raced with the impending weight of the exhibit. His exhibit. The anticipation flickered like candle flames, casting both light and shadow over his thoughts. His art had always been an extension of himself, but he began to question if it would be enough to withstand scrutiny. In the hours before he'd posted about the exhibit, Jack found himself in a battle with his subconscious. Memories of past failures and rejections nudged their way to the surface, urging him to retreat back into the safety of anonymity. But each time, Max would scamper closer, nudging Jack with his nose, a silent reminder of the commitment he had made, to be seen, to be vulnerable. The noise of social media had started as a welcoming hum, but quickly evolved into a cacophony of expectations. What if his audience wouldn't connect with his art the way he hoped? What if they dismissed his work as naive or trivial? He could almost feel criticism clawing at his confidence like a predator lurking in the shadows, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. After another fitful night, Jack found solace in the routine. He immersed himself in painting, allowing the canvas to absorb his despair. With each layer of paint, he wrestled with the emotions trapped inside him. He transformed anger into swirling red, sadness into deep blue, and fear into shadowy black. The drying paint imbued his sketches with narratives that fueled his anxiety, narratives he had yet to confront. As his exhibit date loomed closer, he felt a profound need to confront the most critical aspect of his journey, those roiling fears echoing in his mind. He believed opening night could also be the revealing moment for that part of himself he had yet to tackle openly. Jack decided he needed to tell his story, not just through art, but through words he would speak for the first time in front of an audience. It felt like a colossal step, but the thought ignited a fire within him. Each phrase became a building block, laying a foundation beneath the fear. He began drafting a speech, each word a small reclaiming of his autonomy over his narrative, sculpting the raw material of his experiences into something others could understand. But pleading voices from the past attempted to drown out his resolve. Phrases like, "You'll fail," and "Nobody cares," cloaked him like a fog as he rehearsed his speech by the light of the window at dawn. Doubt seeped in once again, tugging at his confidence. Could he translate the depth of his struggles into words that resonated? Night after night he found himself in the cycle of creation and hesitation, every success overshadowed by the specter of his own self-doubt. Amid this turmoil, he realized something pivotal. Acceptance wasn't simply located on the other side of fear. Acceptance asked for honesty, and for that he needed to be painfully, unequivocally real. In the final days leading to the exhibit, Jack abandoned perfection and instead embraced authenticity. The thought of standing in front of expecting faces and baring his soul both terrified and exhilarated him. The yearning to create a genuine connection painted bright strokes against the canvas of uncertainty. As Jack prepared to take the next crucial steps, not only showcasing his art but voicing his truth, he knew greater battles loomed ahead. The real question wasn't whether his art would succeed, it was whether his words would withstand the scrutiny and spark the connections he craved. What if the fear of being exposed stripped him of everything he had built, but simultaneously opened doors he never knew existed? Was he strong enough to shatter the walls of caution he had built around his heart? As he looked at Max, who stared back with unwavering faith, Jack realized that in this cacophony of doubt, another truth echoed louder. The exhilarating promise of vulnerability could very well be the catalyst he needed. The moment of unveiling his art, and his authenticity, was closer than he had ever imagined. But could he face the specter of his past as he stepped into the light? With each breath, the air thickened, anticipating the poignant clashes between courage and fear. The days rushed by in a blur of paint and paper, each moment pressing against Jack like the weight of 1,000 eyes watching him. The reality of the exhibit crept closer, and with it, the suffocating embrace of anticipation. His rehearsed speech echoed incessantly in his mind, a relentless mantra of vulnerability. The more he practiced, the more he felt the poignant contrast between the palpable fear within him and the truth he was about to articulate. Jack created a ritual, standing before the mirror each morning, staring intently into his own reflection. As he spoke the words intended for his audience, he searched for some glimmer of conviction in his eyes. Yet, what greeted him was often a stranger, a man wrestling with shadows that loomed large. Who was Jack beneath the veneer of artistry and ambition? Did he dare to bring that man into the light? Each stroke on the canvas bore a weight of expectation. He pushed paint across the surface, vigorously infusing it with raw emotion, channeling fears that momentarily faded when colors clashed. As he painted, his mind danced between exhilaration and panic, every vivid hue a reminder of both what he feared to reveal and what he longed to express. One afternoon, amidst a riot of colors, a thought sparked in him. What if he infused his art with the same honesty he sought in his words? What if vulnerability, the very thing that terrified him, became a foundation instead of a stumbling block? The notion struck like a bolt of lightning, igniting a fierce determination. He revisited his previous pieces, dissecting them for that unbridled connection he longed to create. Jack began layering textures, scraps of discarded thoughts, words from his draft rearranged and painted over. Fragments of his life no one had seen laid bare. They were imperfect, yet beautifully honest. There was a rawness in his latest work that felt both foreign and exhilarating. Each canvas he produced became an extension of the speech he was rehearsing. Not merely art, but a living testament to his transformation. As he painted through the night, the moonlight filtering through the window, Jack realized he was emerging into a new state of being. He wasn't merely an artist. He was a storyteller at heart, ready to lead others into the depths of his experience. But that burgeoning confidence was continuously threatened by the specters of doubt. He could hear the dismissive voices whispering at the edges of his consciousness, sowing seeds of dissent. They won't understand. You'll just be another amateur." They crawled back in each time he felt elevated, reminding him of all the times he had fallen short. Nevertheless, Jack found resolve in those moments of fear. Those doubtful whispers became an impetus, not a deterrent. With each stroke, he wrestled with his insecurities and transformed them into vibrant expressions of his journey. He began to adopt a mantra: "I am enough." As opening day approached, breathing exercises became integral to his routine, helping him navigate peaks of anxiety that accompanied every lingering thought. He practiced centering himself, anchoring in the conviction that his worth wasn't tied to others' judgments. The anticipation of speaking before a crowd had morphed from an impending calamity into an essential part of his narrative. Jack welcomed the challenge. What stood before him was not merely an exhibit, but a profound opportunity to break through the walls he had erected. One evening, as he prepared to add the final touches to his pieces, Max trotted into the studio, wagging his tail, infused with innocent joy. Jack crouched down to greet him, feeling the reassuring beat of the dog's heart mirror his own. "We're doing this together," he murmured, embracing Max, momentarily freeing himself from the whirlpool of his fears. But behind that comforting facade lay an unresolved tension, an unnameable worry that loomed like a tempest on the horizon. Was he truly ready to bare his soul and extend that invitation to others? The vulnerability he would share might unleash a tide of reactions he wasn't prepared for. In those quiet moments of reflection, clarity began to surface. This wasn't about perfection or acceptance. It was about connection, the elusive thread that could intertwine his journey with that of others. With a deep, deliberate breath, he readied himself and whispered a single phrase that echoed with finality. Now is the time. What lay ahead still screamed uncertainty, but Jack stood steadfast on the precipice of revelation. The canvas, the words, and the authenticity all converged for a tumultuous unveiling. As the day of reckoning approached, a tempest of exhilaration and dread roiled inside him, begging the question, could he embrace the aftermath of this leap into the unknown? The dawn of the exhibit day arrived, bathing the studio in a soft golden light that felt both promising and foreboding. Jack stirred from sleep, his mind racing with fragmented thoughts about the impending exposure. The clock ticked relentlessly, mirroring the rhythm of his burgeoning panic. He dressed with care, meticulously choosing each piece of clothing, crafting an ensemble that would project the persona he so desperately wanted to embody. Today would mark the beginning of an uncharted journey, and he wanted to step onto that path with intention. As he made his way to the gallery, every passing car and sidewalk conversational buzz intensified the hair-raising apprehension within him. Jack's pulse quickened, time compressing into an anxious knot. Although this was an opportunity to unveil his innermost self, every inch of him wrestled with the instinct to retreat into the familiar shadows of his insecurities. Upon arriving, the gallery seemed to breathe a collective anticipation, humming with the energy of artists, critics, and patrons mingling, their conversations weaving a tapestry of expectations. Jack felt as though he had plunged into a crowd of actors rehearsing a play, and he was expected to hit the stage any moment now. But where was his spotlight? He sought it in the vivid hues of his paintings hanging like vibrant witnesses to his struggle. Stealing a moment alone, he stepped into a quiet corner, closing his eyes, breathing in the richness of paint and possibility. With each breath, he revisited the man he had encountered in the mirror, a man not simply mired in self-doubt, but one who dared to explore vulnerability through art. "I am enough," he repeated as a visual mantra before his heart began to calm. His art was strongly rooted in authenticity. It was no longer a barrier, but a bridge to connection. The sharp sound of laughter and eager applause broke his mediation, pulling him back to the present moment. Jack opened his eyes to see a small crowd gathering around one of his pieces, a tumultuous swirl of colors that mimicked his most challenging emotions. A voice projected clearly above the chatter. "This piece speaks volumes. The emotional depth is palpable." He was taken aback. Jack had poured his essence into that canvas, but hearing others resonate with it ignited a flicker of hope within. He approached cautiously and stood behind the admirers, listening intently. The curator, a poised woman dressed in elegant simplicity, spoke animatedly about the themes of connection and personal discovery. She embraced the very vulnerability Jack had fought to express. As she began to articulate his narrative, Jack felt exposed, yet exhilarated. Could it be that this manifestation of his fears had begun to connect with others? He had stepped into the light, and instead of recoiling, the world seemed to extend a hand toward him. This revelation swelled within him, a burgeoning realization that the intimate details of his struggles might validate others in their own journeys. Yet, the applause faded, and anxiety began to claw its way back as the moment of his speech crept closer. The anticipation took on a weighty form, pressing hard against his chest. Despite the connection he felt, what if his own words betrayed him? What if he stumbled over his carefully crafted speech, rendering his journey moot? The cloak of anxiety threatened to choke him. As the time approached for him to emerge from the silence of observation and speak, a familiar warmth nudged against his leg. Jack looked down to see Max, his loyal companion, gazing up at him with his unwavering affection. In that instant, Jack felt a current of strength flow through him, as if Max were imparting a silent pledge of support. Suddenly, a realization washed over Jack like a cleansing tide. This was his moment, not just to present his art, but to introduce himself. With a deep breath, he let go of latching to perfection. He embraced the imperfections, the authenticity, and the connection that would resonate through every ounce of his being. But just as he prepared to step forward, he caught a throaty laugh, filled with doubt, cutting through the atmosphere like a knife. It was a familiar voice, one from the past, that sent tendrils of fear spiraling in his gut. What does he know about art? Just another wannabe trying to impress. Shadows cast by that sneering tone threatened to dim his resolve. Jack paused, the duality of courage and vulnerability colliding within him violently. The crossroads before him cracked open possibilities. He had the choice to either succumb to the tempest of that taunting voice, or rise above it, the very fight he had cultivated in the depths of his art. He could see the audience before him, curious eyes awaiting authenticity, longing for connection, devoid of judgment, merely searching for truth in a world marred by facade. Jack stood at the threshold of revelation, ready to shatter his fears and give them an experience they wouldn't forget. Today, everything could change, but it would be his choice to seize that opportunity. And with that realization, he felt a creeping excitement, bracing for what lay ahead. Would he take the plunge into honesty and truth? Or would fear dampen his resolve as it had so many times before? Jack stood behind the podium, the lights of the gallery bathing him in a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the biting chill of doubt running through his veins. He had never imagined that unveiling his story would come with such a weight, a tapestry woven of pain, redemption, and connection. As the chatter in the room faded into silence, he glanced at the faces assembled before him, some familiar, some strangers, but all expectant. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the present. This was not merely about him. It was about the bonds formed through vulnerability and honesty. It was about allowing his authentic self to shine through the art that had saved him. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady, but the underlying tremor of emotion made it rich and compelling. "This exhibit is not just a display of art. It's a reflection of my journey, a journey that has been both solitary and studded with connections I had almost lost hope of finding." Each word began to flow more freely, the pathos of his narrative lighting up the vulnerable spaces he had once feared to tread. He spoke of the darkness that had enveloped him, the label of monster that had been thrust upon him, highlighting how art became both his refuge and his voice. He spoke of the bond he shared with Max, illustrating with vivid imagery how love and loyalty had never faltered amidst his struggles. The audience hung on his words, and he could feel a palpable energy swirling through the room. As he continued, Jack wove together fragments of stories, the laughter of his childhood, the pain of loss, the yearning for understanding. He shared how each canvas painted within the confines of his cell had stripped away layers of despair and birthed layers of resilience. In that moment of honesty, he could see reflections of shared struggles in the eyes of those listening. He became aware that every person in the room fought their battles, often hidden beneath the surface, just as he had. "This work is not just mine," Jack declared. his voice rising with conviction. It belongs to anyone who has ever felt lost or misunderstood. It belongs to those who seek connection through the trembling threads of humanity. Together, through vulnerability, we share our truths. With each sentence, he felt a shadow of his insecurities retreat and a renewed sense of purpose emerge. Here he was, no longer just defining himself by his past, but embracing his potential to inspire change. Each brushstroke on his canvases seemed to sing of the redemption found in honesty, the promise of overcoming adversity. As he concluded his speech, a wave of applause cascaded over him, electrifying the air. Jack's heart swelled with unfiltered emotions, relief, pride, and an awakening sense of belonging. This was it. He had transformed self-doubt into a powerful declaration of identity. Later, amidst the swirl of attendees, many eager to discuss his work or share their thoughts, Jack found himself surrounded by an unexpected warmth. People approached, sharing their stories, and he listened intently as tears mingled with laughter. His heart swelled as he found solace in their willingness to connect, the true essence of humanity unfolding around him. He also saw familiar figures from his past mingling in the crowd. Guilt gnawed at him, but before he could retreat into old patterns of self-condemnation, he realized something staggering. Those moments of connection mattered more than the shadows of his past. Each interaction was an opportunity not just for forgiveness but for growth, both for him and for those whose lives had intertwined with his. Accolades poured in, but the highest recognition came from within. The metamorphosis of a man once consumed by regret into one embracing fulfillment and purpose. Jack's paintings were flourishing, each one vibrating with the essence of his journey. As the event drew to a close, Jack stepped into the center of the gallery, taking a moment to absorb the space that echoed with laughter and conversation. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had manifested a space for healing, for connection. He had achieved not just a hope for redemption, but had demonstrated it, proving to himself and others that transformation was possible. Jack glanced down at Max, who lay peacefully at his feet, a testament to the unwavering loyalty that had guided him through darkness. He knelt down, wrapping his arms around the dog, and felt a rush of gratitude. "We did it, buddy," he whispered, breathing in the warmth of unconditional love. With his heart full and his spirit ignited, Jack stood taller. He knew this was just the beginning, an invitation for others to explore their own paths of growth and discovery. Throughout the gallery, he saw radiant possibilities woven together. Every connection formed through stories shared, every voice that mattered, a vibrant affirmation of life. As he stepped out into the night, the cool air encircled him, and Jack let out a deep sigh of relief. Here in this new chapter, his narrative was now one of hope, connection, and an openness to what lay ahead. He felt not just free, he felt liberated. Emboldened, Jack understood the urgency to share his journey further. This was not just an accomplishment, it was a call to action for those who needed to hear his story, a message that resonated deep within the shadows. And now, he would continue to share, to inspire, to support others on their paths toward healing, knowing that vulnerability was not a sign of weakness, but the highest form of strength. So if you believe in the power of transformation like Jack does, you need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support, so click that bell to ensure you don't miss more emotional stories that inspire change. And take a moment to leave a like now. It truly makes a difference in helping others find these stories. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Because the stories of personal overcoming deserve to reach every corner of hope. Become part of this community where every challenge can lead to triumph,